Okay, so welcome to the June event of our Integrative Conservation Webinar Series. Can you guys hear me well? Sound good? So today we have a very interesting event. So we are very grateful to the three panelists that will be talking to us today. Before we go into today's panel, just let me do a couple of simple comments and introductions. First, you know that this event is part of the monthly Integrative Conservation Webinar Series. So then for everyone in the audience, you know that the first Tuesday of every month, we hold an event at this time. And the events tend to be online. They can be, could be a seminar, could be a panel, could be a different format, but the idea is to bring topical issues about conservation. And of course, this event is part of Integrative Conservation, the newly launched journal by the Xishuangbanna Tropical Botanical Garden. So this journal was launched in December 2022. We have published 2 issues so far. The next issue is coming up very soon. And we are very keen on having submissions, particularly from young conservation scientists from different parts of the world. The journal has a global scope. So then if you have a manuscript, you're looking for a place to submit, we're very keen on getting papers on integrated conservation. Okay, so not just classical ecology with a bit of conservation, but dealing with complex, messy problems. And we have a call for a special issue on human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. And the deadline for this special issue is mid-August. So and for those in the audience working on this topic, please consider submitting a paper for special issue. So then let's go to today's event. My name is Ahimsa Campos-Arceiz. I am a professor at the Xishuangbanna Tropical Botanical Garden, and I'm one of the editors-in-chief of Integrative Conservation. And today we have a very exciting panel on human-wildlife conflicts and coexistence, discuss current and future perspectives. We have 3 outstanding panelists that I will introduce briefly now. We have Dr. Alexandra Zimmermann. Alexandra is the chair of the IUCN Specialist Group on Human-Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence. She's the founder, chair, and through this group, she has made huge progress in bringing human-wildlife conflicts into the policy agenda. So then I think we'll hear more about the specialist group later. She's also a senior research fellow in Wild Crew at the University of Oxford and a senior advisor on human-wildlife conflict for the World Bank. So then very high-level positions and very important role in dealing between the science and the policy. Professor, we have also Professor Liu Chu, and I'm really sorry for the pronunciation, Professor Liu. She's a professor of conservation biology at the School of Life Sciences and the Institute of Ecology of Peking University. I guess most of our audience will be familiar with Professor Liu's work. She has been a pioneer in conservation science in China, is one of the most renowned and influential conservation scientists in China and Asia and globally. She's also the founder of Shanshui Conservation Center, and so that, again, people in China will be very familiar with Shanshui, and I have some of your toys here. I think this is part of Shanshui's marketing, so then and Shanshui does very commendable work, linking the science with the practice. And I think Professor Liu will talk more about her work in Southwest China and also in the Tibetan Plateau. And we have Dr. Vidya Athreya. Vidya is the director and head of the Wildlife Conservation Society in India. She has been working, she will tell more about her work later. I am a big fan of her work and her study system. And besides her research and conservation, I encourage you guys to read her popular writing because it really helps to bring the complexities and the personal and the social elements of human-wildlife interactions in a very beautiful way. So, and if you want to know more, I recommend to check her it's called blog or website, projectwahoba.com. You can see in the information for the event more details. So then let's go with the panel. Thank you, the 3 of you, for being with us today. And maybe we can start. I would like to start just with each one of you introducing briefly to the audience your work on human-wildlife conflicts, your professional link to this topic, and anything you want to add. about this. So maybe we can start with Alex. Alex, if you're going to go first.
Hi, thanks Ahimsa, and thanks for organizing this. It's really nice to join you all. Yeah, so I've been working on human-wildlife conflict since 2000. And pretty much I started working on Asian elephant conflict with people, and then a lot on jaguars and a bit on bats and Mauritius and all sorts of species all over the world. And I just became fascinated with the patterns and trying to find patterns around the world in the human side and in any angle of it. So that's what I've been focusing on, the social side, the political side, and so on. So I'll speak a bit more about that later.
Thank you, Alex. So maybe Professor Liu, you want to go next? Can you hear me, Professor Liu?
Yes.
Yeah, you want to go? Yeah, please. You can go next.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you, Ahimsa. I'm delighted to share some of my experiences today on human-wildlife conflicts and coexistence. I've been working on wildlife in China, wildlife work, research and conservation practices in China since 1985. That exposed my age. My first case actually encountered on such a conflict was one panda killed 13 sheep. That was in 90s. Then I worked in Southwest mountains in China and Tibetan Plateau, where wildlife are more abundant, especially carnivores. As you probably know, that Tibetan Plateau, Eastern Tibetan Plateau and the Southwest mountains of China has the most large carnivore species. We have 9 species in this corner of the world. So, of course, you see many conflicts, and ranging from large predation to crop damage to competition on grassland resources, natural resources. And so my work has a lot involved in solving these conflicts. So I'd like to share some of the experiences and lessons learned. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Vidya?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Ahimsa, for inviting me for this. It's a really interesting panel here. Yeah, my work started really long back looking at, as a biologist, looking at leopards that lived in croplands among very high density of people. And slowly, I guess the leopards taught me that conflict is more about people than it is about animals. So it was really interesting, the both professional and personal journey, trying to understand more about how humans impact shared spaces, how humans impact conflict, and how solutions also lie among the humans. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidya. Okay, so what we'll do now, we'll have around 35-40 minutes of questions that I will be posting to the panel. And after that, we'll open for Q&A to the public also. Okay, so then the audience, please write down your questions and you will have a chance to make your questions. If you are on co-share or show it on, you can write your questions in the chat box, and we will try to convey as many questions as possible to the panelists. So then I would like to go next into a few definitions, okay, to kind of set the context for what we're talking about when we talk about human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. So maybe the next question to Alex. As the chair of the Human-Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence Specialist Group, I know that you have been working a lot on developing a definition of what is human-wildlife conflict. And I know it was not an easy task. So then, would you mind telling us what a human-wildlife conflict and why it was difficult to come with a definition?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Ahimsa. It's such a good question, because actually defining any complex issue is difficult to do. In fact, all definitions are difficult to agree as a group. But this was particularly tricky because as we've already heard our other speakers also allude to, this is an issue that is largely about people, and yet it appears to be largely about wildlife. And so when you start to really think about what the definition of human-wildlife conflict, the term itself is problematic already. So the term human-wildlife conflict suggests that there is a conflict between wildlife and humans. That's what it says. Now, the more and more all of us have worked on this, the more you realize actually this is, in essence, these are conflicts between different groups of people about the wildlife. But they are triggered by an interaction between wildlife and people. And then they escalate and they develop into conflicts between groups of people about what should be done. And that is really the world over, the recurring pattern. Something happens between an animal or a group of animal and some people, and then that triggers a whole mess of other things. And then that boils up into conflict. So how do you capture that in a sentence? And so we looked at the elements of it and decided, well, what's happening here is that there is some interaction that is recurring usually, not just that happens once and never again. There's a recurrence. The interaction, which is perhaps a negative, something that is perceived as negative from by people, it could be perceived or it could be actual. Sometimes it's not even completely verified with whether animals cause damage or not, or to what extent. And that then leads into all sorts of disagreements between the stakeholders. So the definition that we've proposed is along those lines, that there's basically, we've called it the struggles that emerge when the presence of behavior leads to disagreements between groups of people. That's a short version of it. And I know that, and that can stir up some debate, and that's a good thing, because by debating these different angles, in the process of doing that, we all learn. So we actually wanted to throw it out there as a bit of here's a new way of looking at it. And so I welcome discussions on definitions, actually. But also to say that, it's fine to have multiple definitions out there in the world. Doesn't have to be one universal one that everyone has to subscribe to. But that's what we came up with in our thinking.
Yes, I think it was a very, very important exercise to get the right people to discuss about, how to delimit, how to define some boundaries. They don't need to be permanent or impermeable, but having some sort of boundaries to make it functional, to be able to work on it. And I think it's very interesting that that definition means that the conflict involves at least two groups of people disagreeing on something, right? But do you think there are situations in which basically there is no such disagreement between human groups, in which you have a wildlife species and a human community without having a third party disagreeing on it? Is that something that does happen, or do you think that is?
Very good question. Is that to me or?
I mean, I think, to you. I'm thinking about the elephants, in which I understand that in many cases there are disagreements with, between different stakeholders, the conservationists, the local community, the local politicians. But there are situations in which people might agree, that they like species. I'm thinking about elephants, that in many countries elephants are highly liked and revered, but they do cause a negative impact on some people's livelihood or safety. And then not always there's a struggle between different groups of people. Or is that a common case?
Yeah, so I mean, I would argue that if wildlife, let's say anyone, it doesn't have to be elephants, it could be reptiles, sharks, cats, cause some damage or perceived to be in any way, impacting humans in some way, but the people affected don't mind. Now, imagine that it's theoretically possible. They don't mind.
Okay.
Then there is no conflict. If no one else is arguing about, no, you shouldn't have these animals here, or no, you shouldn't do something, you shouldn't, then there is no conflict. It's an interaction, yes, but I would continue to argue the actual arguments are between people. the interaction is there between wildlife and people, but the argument, the conflict is between people. But yeah, I'd love to hear other views on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. May I comment?
Please.
I think I agree that the conflict involves people's perceptions and different opinions among different groups. The arguments, the differences often are on the reasons why the conflict is raised, is introduced. Often it's explained that the conflict is because there are too many wildlife, but in many cases, it's actually not. It involves changes of human behavior. Often it involves changes of human behavior. For example, the brown bears on the Tibetan Plateau in recent years often break into houses, people's houses, and even kill people in occasional incidents. That perhaps also involved in the changing behavior of nomadic lifestyle to settlements. So you have access food and an empty house when people move to summer grazing, and you have an empty house that left available for brown bears, and there are more incidences of house breaking in. Of course, nomadic people didn't have houses before. So this is a very small example. So understanding the reasons is always helpful. But then these reasons of increased conflicts are not always obvious, actually. That's my brief comments.
So, Vidya, do you want to add anything on this?
Yeah, thanks. I would say it was a really interesting question. And I think maybe really long back when there were no, because the animals now are represented by some group of people. It could be conservationists, usually it's forestry or wildlife officials. So there's always a group, even if they don't want to represent the animal because of the complex situation, because of their jobs, they do represent the animals. So I think conflicts between people are inevitable now just simply because of the presence of groups of people that represent animals. Yeah.
Yes, so maybe we'll follow with another definition. So then the other key word here is coexistence. And coexistence has become a very, a buzzword for the last 10, 15 years. And often I hear from students, what do we mean by coexistence? So how does coexistence look? So then maybe Professor Liu, would you like to comment on what it means, human-wildlife coexistence?
Yeah, it's very educational. Sure. It's very educational for me when I first started to work on the Tibetan Plateau, when I see people have such a high tolerance to wildlife living around them, even sometimes bringing livelihood damages and negative impacts. One extreme example was one old man decided to leave his grazing pasture to Przewalski gazelles because if both livestock and gazelles grazing at the same time, there would be not enough grass. And of course, his son and the daughter-in-law were strongly in disagreements. But because he's an old man, respected the person in the family, that still happened. They moved their livestock to other pasture, left a significant patch to Przewalski gazelle. One other example is that during the storm about 4 years ago on the Tibetan Plateau, and government provided grass for livestock. As soon as the livestock is fed, people start to carry feed to mountains because the wild ungulates are also hungry. So there is a even in the summer, you will see people stopping cars from running over worms. These worms actually eat grass, which has a negative impact to their grazing. But not to kill lives is a Buddhist teaching, which these people believe. So you see the different value system actually provide very different perceptions how the conflict is perceived. I'm a strong supporter to, bring up this issue, the value issue, to solve the conflicts. But however, even if people have the high tolerance, that doesn't mean they should bear the cost of conflicts. So the society and the policy should provide support to the laws in one way or another. So on the one example we worked on is to reduce the snow leopard predation damage by introducing ecotourism into the village, having the villagers who monitor wildlife as guides and provide homestay services, so they gain income directly from what they conserved. So these kind of mechanisms, I think, it's a holistic mechanism. It's a holistic approach. It's not a single one that solves all problems. So we're still trying. So these are some experience I have experienced.
Thank you, Professor Lu. So you brought up three very, very important topics. One is the issue of values, and then the issue of tolerance, and then the issue of who bears the cost, the distribution of cost because of conservation or wildlife. So Vidya, would you like to add anything on tolerance? I think you know a lot about tolerance, and also how coexistence looks in your opinion.
Yeah, coexistence and all these terms are really, really complex. Rather than tolerance, I would actually use the word acceptance, because I think there's a difference between being tolerant and being accepting. But again, it's all about words. And I think these things are so complex that words may not be able to capture it. Yes, I think I don't know, in India, I find that there are a lot of relationships between people and wildlife, and it could even be in cultures that hunt. They still like, for instance, in Northeast India, you have tribals who do hunt, but for them, there are rituals, there are taboos which prevent them and which allow them to hunt when, why. And I don't think we as scientists have ever tried to understand those. For instance, if they hunt the tiger, they are supposed to do some really serious rituals for a whole year. Otherwise, they believe that there will be ill luck on their entire family. And I think we in the conservation field really need to understand more in spaces, especially where we go to work. We, instead of going in with our value systems and our perspectives, I think it's really important to recognize that the people there have their own value systems and their perspectives and work based on that. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidya. Alex, anything on coexistence or tolerance?
Yeah, absolutely. Coexistence, I think, and I see some questions in the chat that are very common and very good. Around coexistence, first of all, is the word itself is difficult to, we're just talking about one English word here. Other languages have slightly better words that they use for the concept of coexistence. So, for example, in German, the word is several words. It's living together in low conflict. That's a whole phrase, but that's how we say coexistence in German. And that also tells you already something very much more important, which is that there is a living together and that conflict is low. So it's acceptable, it works. And so the English word coexistence tends to suggest that there's some beautiful harmony and everything is rosy and wonderful. And that I worry about, because that's really very difficult to achieve between nature and people ever. So I worry that if we obsess too much about the word coexistence as a goal, that we expect something that isn't realistic. And so this shying away from the word conflict isn't necessarily helpful. And it is very unique in the conservation sector that there's this reaction against the word conflict. You don't find that in other sectors, for example, in peace building, in conflict analysis and so on. The word conflict is just taken as a fact. It is what it is. It is not necessarily negative. It is a catalyst for change. That is what conflict does. It forces change. So this is sort of an interesting debate, very peculiar to conservation, where we, for some reason, really are allergic to the word conflict and we want to use the rosy coexistence. And I think that they are treated as extremes. The whole thing is a kind of a dynamic system. However, again, I think let's not have conflicts about terms. Let's focus on the task, actually, which is difficult. And let's just keep these things in mind and try to find ways ahead. So, yeah, I'll stop there.
Yes, thank you. I think that's, I agree with what you said about conflict and coexistence. So let's move away from definitions. And I wanted to also ask Alex to introduce or to explain a little bit about the new guidelines that the specialist group has recently launched. So if you want to briefly tell people about these guidelines, what are the driving principles, and some basic ideas.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so what we've done in the Human-Wildlife Conflict Specialist Group of the IUCN is made a first attempt at distilling the best current knowledge into one document. And this is, I stress, it's the first attempt. I think we will see future editions of it as the wider community inputs and adds and so on. However, so these are the first IUCN guidelines on the matter. And so you can think as a comparable product, for example, the guidelines on reintroductions and translocations. So the intention here is to give an outline of what you need to think about when you work in this field, whether it's on whether it's on the ground or in policy level, at all levels. And so what we aim with this, it is certainly not a manual. It is not, here is how you deal with a troublesome elephant step by step. It is not that. This is principle based. So it is about, here are the things you should consider and think about, and then design the strategy that is completely appropriate for the local context, culture, situation. So it is, so we focus on 5 principles, and then there is a checklist of things to think about that matches that. So the first principle that we suggest here, and it might seem unusual, but it's deliberately the first one, is do no harm. And what is meant there is that these things are often so delicate that if you were to blunder in there uninformed and just try and put up a quick repellent or something, actually quite a lot of harm can be done to the relationships, the animals, the situation. So it starts off with really understand the context, understand what is going on and what is the history of the situation and so on. And it prompts you in these guidelines to ask these questions. The second principle is about really a deep understanding of the issues and the context. The third principle is about collaboration and working together. That is with all the relevant parties affected and involved, and really understanding who is involved. It is usually, it's pretty much never a binary, a two-party situation. There are many, and often you don't really uncover who all is affected and has a stake in this until you get to really know the situation. The fourth principle is about integrating science and policy at all levels. And the fifth principle is about thinking about sustainable solutions that aren't donor dependent, that are perhaps about how the affected community has full ownership of the process and of the way forward, and can continue to work towards coexistence. So in a nutshell, and that's quite a lot of information right there, but just the bottom line is it's a principle-based guideline. And I think my colleague has put the link in the chat, so you can go and have a look. We currently have this document only came out 2 months ago. It's only in English right now, but we're looking to have it in around 6 languages fairly soon, by end of the year.
Will it be translated to Chinese?
Very much hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Okay, so Vidya, you're also a member of the specialist group, and you were very much involved in these guidelines. Do you have any comment on the guidelines?
No, I think it's, I mean, I do have a comment, which is that it's quite an incredible document, I think, because it is, when we started out, I don't think, at least I didn't have a good idea of where it was going. And the final document, I think, is really nice because it talks about things that you don't find normally in any conflict management guidelines. So, yeah, I am really happy that I was part of this. So, yeah.
Well, something that I think is very important is the first principle of do no harm. I think that's a very important thing to stress in conservation, because I think often we're doing the wrong thing, pushing people to make recommendations in any situation, when I think in many cases we don't know how to act. And as an editor, I know that often we ask people, okay, what are your recommendations? But I think we should be clear that in many cases we don't know what to do. So we should be very, very careful to make recommendations for the sake of doing them, because they are complex systems, and it's very likely that we will make many mistakes before something tends to work. So then I think I was very, very pleased to see that as the starting principle. So let's go into policy, and I will ask this to Professor Liu, but also to the panelists. Human-wildlife conflicts and coexistence were explicitly mentioned in the final text of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. But again, in Target 4 says that it calls for urgent management action to, on many themes, effectively manage human-wildlife interactions to minimize human-wildlife conflict for coexistence. It reads great, and so then, what do you think is the relevance of how important do you think it is to include this in the framework, but also how operational it is? How can it be implemented? Is fine to say let's minimize the conflicts, but how we do that, how we monitor or evaluate that?
Yeah, absolutely important. I think it's important at different levels. One is that we are now talking about by 2030 to reverse the trend of biodiversity loss, decline. So that means we should expect more wildlife around people. So with increase of wildlife, and also in many parts of the world, the population of humans also increase. So with both increasing, the conflicts may increase too. That's one level. Then second is that in the target 3, we talked about OECM, other effective area-based conservation measures. That means that 30-30 target requires conservation outside of protected areas. When you talk about outside of protected areas, the land use of that piece of that piece of land with effective conservation measures may involve other types of land use, like agricultural land or even urban land use, construction land. So human dominated land use type. So, and in this kind of land use, the conflicts will also increase. Conservation in this kind of land use the managing conflicts becomes necessary. Without this solving the conflicts, conservation in those areas, human-dominated land use, may not be possible. So it's important. On the other hand, it's also important to see, actually, I think the conflict level that includes what we have discussed, the tolerance level and the level of understanding to the conflicts by different people. I think it's also a good indicator of human-wildlife relationship and the level of conservation, how successful conservation is. So that's my understanding to this. And of course, monitoring is the key to provide evidences. And right now, whether it's for 30-30 targets or sustainable use or any targets that involves increase of biodiversity would require evidences. Monitoring becomes critical, and this is a significant gap that not only in China but also I think many countries in the whole world. I actually would like to suggest the world should work together to develop a career wildlife monitoring, biodiversity monitoring. Like environmental monitoring has become a career. There are special institutions and people, professional people specialized on this, and there are money invested in it. But on wildlife, on biodiversity, this area is much weaker. That requires improvements. That's all.
Thank you, Marcelo. Yeah, Alex, I believe you were very much involved in including human-wildlife conflicts in Target 4. What is your thinking about what was the final result? And again, the implementability or how it can be translated into national legislation, the indicators, and the monitoring, the practicalities of it.
Yeah, thanks, Ahimsa. So, I mean, there were many people involved in this, but the Secretariat of the Convention did reach out to our specialist group for thoughts and inputs on this. So we had the opportunity to try and make suggestions through the IUCN delegation and try and help with the wording. So, in the beginning, back in 2019, when targets were being kind of fleshed out, it was even, should human-wildlife conflict be mentioned in the post-2020 as it was then? And so from there, the whole evolution of how you get to the final wording, which was literally finalized in the last days of the COP in December. And so I think the most important thing here, and that is really a complete game changer for this topic, is that human-wildlife conflict and coexistence are explicitly in the text. They are in Target 4, which is the main species target. The wording, in my opinion, is fine. It's a little long, but it's fine. It gets the gist of it. And what we have to remember here is the fact that it's in there. That is the important thing, because it means that human-wildlife conflict coexistence are now at the absolutely highest level of international intergovernmental policy. It means that if it applies to your country, you must take this seriously, basically, according to the treaty, and try your best to do something about it. How you then do that is the next question. But the first thing to say here is that from my experience around the world, and having done studies on this, I know that every single country struggles with human-wildlife conflict. Every country. It doesn't, even the very, very small urban states do. So, and to different extents, of course. For many countries, these are huge issues that come into politics where entire sectors of society are saying, we will not vote unless you fix the problems with the elephants and so on. It goes from that level to just practical issues where there's a bit of a demonstration or something. So a range of things. So this is the first step. It's an intergovernmental UN level policy. Now the next step is two things: assisting countries and all parties in working with this issue. That is the biggest challenge by far. So building the capacity of how you do that. And then the next one beyond that is how are countries going to monitor their conflict and their progress towards coexistence. That, again, is extremely difficult to do because of the range of situations. These are 196 countries that are signatory to this treaty. How are they going to do that in a comparable way? And again, our specialist group has been tasked with trying to convene that effort, convene a collective think on how we might do that. And we're going to be starting that within the next few weeks. And it's open to different institutions and experts to join.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, just a quick comment. I'm being told that we have over 2,200 people online, and people who are watching on Shoutout and co-share, you please feel free to write your questions on the chat box, and that will be communicated with the panelists later. So, Vidya, you want to add anything on the relevance of conflict coexistence being included in the GBF?
Well, I think it's just like Alex said, it's such a serious issue, and it's also like in a country like India, it affects politics, it affects elections, and it is genuinely a problem for local people. But increasing biodiversity, especially of conflict-causing species, is going to be a problem. And also these relationships on which coexistence is based always is open to change because it's as changeable as culture is. So that is something we have to keep in mind. But I believe that so far we are targeting animals for solutions until the mindset changes of policymakers, of managers, that the solutions lie in a proactive manner in dealing with people so that we can help the people better, mitigate their losses. I think that shift will probably take such a long time that it may not work. I don't know. Sometimes I feel that. Yeah.
Okay, so then we will wrap up soon this part of the panel. So maybe I would like to ask each of the panelists, talking about the future and taking time. So what is your outlook for the future of human-wildlife interactions? Maybe in the systems you're more familiar with, so then maybe some comments on the global trends, what you expect for, let's say, 2050, and also in globally and the system that you're more familiar. Are you pessimistic? Are you optimistic? Do you think that we will learn to manage these interactions in a more kind of a harmonious way, or in a less conflict way? Or do you think that species like tigers, elephants, crocodiles will be in trouble in the long term? If Vidya, you want to start?
Yeah, thanks, Ahimsa. So I don't know, I have hope as well because these animals are quite incredible. They live just like Lucy was saying, and in India you have animals in urban spaces, rural spaces with high density of people. So it is a story of hope, and it's not just India. There are, large, even small conflict-causing species all over the world. But the challenge really lies in what I said earlier, and I wish these guidelines were something we were talking about, 15 years back, but we are talking about it now. And I don't know if we have enough time to actually see the change, but yeah, so it's a change in mindset of policymakers and managers. I don't know if we are too late or if we are at the right time. That is what I want to say.
So about the guidelines have been shared. There's a link on the Zoom box. So then please let's share them also in co-share and share it on so all the audience know where to find them. Okay, I think that is a very important document. So Alex, what is your outlook for the future of human-wildlife conflict and coexistence?
Well, I think if you work in conservation, you have to be an optimist. Otherwise, you are in the wrong place, sadly, because it is a hell of a challenge. The thing is that humans have incredible capacity to solve very, very complex problems and to get together and overcome all sorts of challenges and solve problems. The thing is, though, that this is one among so many global issues and challenges right now, from climate to pandemics to biodiversity, everything. So it's sort of, in a way, it seems overwhelming. However, I think I am certainly in the optimist box. I think it is doable. And I think that there's an urgency and a lot we need to do. So that means we need to try and avoid the distractions that are around arguing about little details and terminologies and so on. We're all roughly pointing in the same direction of what we would like to see, some form of enabling coexistence. So we really must collaborate and work together and constantly learn from each other. That is the most important thing in here, and head in the right direction together as a community.
Thank you very much, Alex. Professor Liu?
Yes, I would like to provide some information from China on the current situation and the prospect, perhaps. There are two trends I see that there is an increasing conflicts. If you compare with, say, year 2000, in past 20 years, in many places, the wildlife population have increased, especially species like wild boar, ungulates, monkeys, and so on, and some large species like elephants and some carnivores also as well on the Tibetan plateau. So if you compare with 50 years ago or 60 years ago, the population is still low. But to compare with 20 years ago, there is a curve of increasing. One example, one example is the crested ibis, increased from 7 individuals who mostly depend on rice fields to now 7,000. Still depend on, rice field, mostly rice fields. It's benefited from the policies and conservation programs that reduce the pesticides and chemical fertilizers in rice fields, and also governmental compensations to farmers for not doing so, and the crop losses. This is the policies in China have been dealing with the conflicts and potential ones by introducing insurances. And behind that is the government pays insurance companies to manage the conflicts and provide conflicts, the losses, the compensation to losses. Of course, in different places, the implementation of this policy may be
Recording
different.
Stopped.
We need to monitor closely on the effectiveness of this program. In many places, may not be as effective as people had expected, because there are costs to really develop a reasonable program on compensation. Compensation, of course, is controversial also, whether it's beneficial or actually introduce more problems that still need to be monitored. But on the other hand, I think there is a greater tolerance from the society to wildlife. One extreme example is our campus. Like Vidya mentioned, the more wildlife living next to crowded human population. On our campus, Peking University, there are over 200 species of birds living together with at least 50,000 people on a very small space, less than 1 square kilometer. So that is mainly because students and faculties would like to see birds around. And we set up our campus. The university decided to set up the campus designated the campus as a conserved area for wildlife, for biodiversity. There are many examples on farmlands. Farmers would like to have wildlife around them, and city dwellers would like to have wildlife on them. So such a trend, I think, would also introduce much more creative ways for conservation, especially outside of protected areas. So I in general remain hopeful to the future of coexistence. Although there are key issues still need to be worked out. I have mentioned earlier on the cost, who should pay for it, who should bear the cost, and the incentive mechanisms to encourage the coexistence. Conservation, biodiversity is the public good, public benefit. I think it should still be supported by governments and the whole society to encourage the positive interactions between humans and wildlife. I'd like to comment one on the indicator for monitoring. I think one important indicator is not only about how humans tolerate wildlife, it's also about how much wildlife tolerates humans. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting comments, the three of you. Yeah, I would like to highlight before we open to the floor. So those of you who want to make questions, please raise your hand in Zoom, and then I will call you for questions. I would like to highlight what Professor Liu was saying, that if we are successful with conservation, which probably will be successful locally in many places, we'll have more wildlife in closer contact with people and more conflict. So then conservation success will lead to more conflicts that will need to be managed properly. So that's something that we need to be aware of. And also, I think it's very important, the issue about the global social changes in terms of global values, how people are much more, they care much more about nature and conservation in general than that they used to do before, at least in urban areas, or at least in a more explicit way. And I think this will be also a positive thing for conservation. And of course, how to share the cost, how to make sure that not those communities who live closer to nature are the ones who are paying for conservation while everyone else is benefiting from it. Those are very important messages. Okay, so we'll open for questions now. Those of you who are interested in making any question in Zoom, please just raise your hand and I will give you a turn. When you make a question, please tell your name and your institution. And then, yes. So then, James Gambisa, if you want to start, please turn on your microphone and then you present.
Thanks for organizing an excellent webinar. What I would like to suggest for future discussions is, if it were possible, to also hear the voices of the people who live with wildlife. That would really give us another perspective, which also adds to that comment which was made by one of the presenters of values, so that we can take these into account. But thank you very much for an excellent webinar.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you very much, James. Well noted. So, Tom, if you want to tell us where are you from, what's your affiliation, and your question?
Yes, can you hear me? Sorry, it's a bit noisy.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, so hi, my name is Yuton. I think my affiliation is Massachusetts Institute of Technology, but I spent my last 2 years in UWC Mahindra College in Pune, Maharashtra. That's why I'm particularly interested in this webinar, because of the wildlife issues I care about in India. So in this regard, I have a question particularly for Athreya G. As someone who has stayed in India for 2 years, I noticed there's a huge intersection with like religion symbols and wildlife protection. And how do you think like religion, particularly the reverence for Hanumanji in Hinduism, has affected all the like human-monkey coexistence and conflicts?
Thank you, Yuton. I think Vidya, you're the natural respondent for this.
Thanks, Yutong. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I think we are just about trying to find answers. I don't know if it's religion or if it's culture. Okay, there is a lot of use in religion, but what impacts the way people view the wildlife may be more cultural as well. And there's a very interesting example in Himachal Pradesh. If you go there, you'll find temples to the monkey god almost in every lane. And they had some serious conflict there, and they put out a directive to cull them, but it was so difficult to get people to kill the monkeys. And I think it's got a lot to do with the reverence that is attached to them. So definitely all these things really impact. In fact, in Bangalore, where I live, apparently there are shrines that they put up. If a monkey has died, they put up a shrine over there and people go and pray to the shrine. And they also do this, I don't know what it's called, wake, where you give food to a lot of people. And I know that in one place where the monkey had died, 500 people came for the wake, And I often say, I don't think that many will come if I die, So, yeah.
Do you want to make anyone else want to comment on religion and also the voices of those who live with wildlife? Alex?
All right. I guess I'll go back to James's comment, and thanks, Yutong, also, of involving those who actually live with wildlife. Yes, absolutely. And we, working in the scientific sector, for example, in a webinar like this, of course, it's open to anyone to join and so on, but we have to make that extra effort, and you have to reach out. You have to go much above and beyond to make other sectors, other communities feel that they are invited also and have access to these kinds of forums. We recently ran a major conference in Oxford on human-wildlife conflict, and I just remember from having led that process that the most time-consuming thing was to really try and include the non-usual suspects, the non-scientists and the government and so on. And I think that is very, very important. And we all need to keep doing that when we organize events like this. So I thought it was a really good point.
Yeah, if I can add, Alex just organized the first international conference on human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. And that conference was unusual in many ways, in many positive ways, including having a high presence of people from communities. So I think the voice of many different stakeholders, not just researchers, was represented in that conference. Anything else to add, Professor Liu?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question when the internet was not. I guess the internet wasn't.
The role of religion and also the voices of the local communities who experience the conflict.
Okay. Yeah, this is what I mentioned earlier about the value system. The tolerance and the perceptions on conflicts. If it is a conflict, even though the outsiders like us or governments recognize that as a conflict. There are two sides of it, I think. But the people who are in the center of this conflict may not be seeing it, may not see this as such a serious issue. That happens, like the case I mentioned, the old man that left the grassland for Przewalski gazelles. There's a clear conflict from our perspective, but he actually decided to leave the grassland for wildlife. That was an extreme case. One other situation is that I think it's two sides of it. We do have the people who are Buddhists and tolerate. When we ask them about predation of large carnivores, they would say they are carnivores, they have to eat meat. So livestock is the meat. So they prey on life, the kill livestock is a natural behavior, but on the other hand, it is true loss to them. We also observed examples of, same community people had a retaliative killings. So I think the value is important, but there is a condition also to it. How people behave when they encounter a conflict. So both sides of the story has to be considered.
Thank you. We have some specific questions. One is from Xishuangbanna from the Northwest Plateau Biology Institute of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And they ask, talking about the situation in the Qinghai Tibet Plateau, where people leave leftovers for stray dogs. I assume it's part of the Buddhist tradition of feeding animals. It's very common throughout Asia, in which people will give food to stray dogs and cats. In this case, what they're saying is that this attracts brown bears who come for foraging, and then so this can create some conflicts. It's a long question that I cannot really tell. But I think it's a case of interaction between people's values, trying to do good, and in some cases maybe creating some unintended consequence, leading to conflict between some wild species people. So do you have any experience with such kind of thing, Professor Liu, with people feeding animals?
Yes, this brown bear example happened to a monastery in Qinghai, in Yushu. There are residential brown bears living around the monastery, and they're constantly coming to the monastery to search for food, and the monks would feed them. And the distance between brown bear and people are very, very close. That caused alert from people from outside. But the monastery, there's a debate around whether this behavior should be encouraged or discouraged, or should be allowed even to do that. So far, I guess the government and many conservationists also felt that this good intention should not be punished, but on the other hand, the caution should be acknowledged. But there's still not a solution in the reality yet. So it is a question or a problem actually. The feeding animal, even releasing animals into wild, because of the Buddhist belief for being nice to other living beings, has been very common. That has caused some problems, like fishes, releasing fishes into rivers, but fishes actually from outside, from the alien species. Dominant the ecosystem and actually causing problems for local species. This actually has been dealt with in the law. In the recently published wildlife law in China, it's releasing alien species into local ecosystem is prohibited. It's illegal. So I think the behavior should be based on science. Good heart also should, similarly, the policy should be based on science, and the good heart and behaviors should be based on science too. There are a lot of science needs to be done, and education needs to be done.
Yeah. It's a case where education can play a very major role. I think this having many issues with people releasing exotic species or feeding stray dogs and having very big population of stray dogs that cause other problems for conservation. So we have another question from Megan from, I think, the City University of Hong Kong. And Megan is asking that it has been predicted that El Niño will lead to a warmer summer than usual this year. And would it cause, and it will cause more conflict between wildlife and humans. So do you think this will lead to more conflicts? And if so, what kind of solutions could be done to deal with this? It's a very specific question. I don't know if you have any comment on this topic. Do you expect that things like climate change? So I think if we kind of move a bit in a broader picture, climate change is going to alter many things. It's going to produce more droughts, and it's going to produce other kind of changes. And that is going to create alterations in ecosystems that will often force wildlife outside of their usual behavior and get into close contact with people, and the other way around. And that might increase. We have some spikes in which suddenly we have more interaction, more conflict. So anyone wants to comment on that interaction?
Well, I have an example from the Tibetan Plateau, because that is also an area of, sorry. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. I think the El Nino is related to the overall climate change, global climate change. So if that's the question, on climate change, warmer temperature does influence the patterns of distribution of wildlife. One example on the Tibetan Plateau is that we are closely monitoring whether the leopard, which is Vidya's area of study, the leopard population actually moving up to higher elevation due to the tree line increase, moving up. And because leopard has a larger body size and more stronger, is more powerful, that may also cause more wildlife conflicts. And so far, we felt that they are both, and then also they might be causing conflict with snow leopards above tree line. So far, this has not happened yet, but there is a potential conflicts, higher conflicts between the leopard and snow leopards and the leopard and the livestock as well.
Alex, is there any link between the intergovernmental panel on climate change and IPCC reports and human-wildlife conflicts? Has this been explicitly explored?
That hasn't so far, and so actually, where I would come in here is that we can probably assume that climate change will have an effect on human-wildlife conflict. However, this has not been studied. I can think of about 2 people in the world who've written anything on this. So it hasn't been studied very much. However, it seems logical for a few reasons. One is that climate changes how humans use the land, and climate changes how wildlife use the land, frankly. They move in reaction to resources and so on. So what you get, it is probable that climate change, short-term or long-term, any changes, or even just an El Nino or something like that, changes the pattern of overlap of the human range and the wildlife range, if you want to think of it that way. And ultimately, human-wildlife conflict is a function of overlap and of interaction. Where humans and wildlife do not contact each other at all, you don't get these clashes. And where it becomes then dangerous is if these changes are rapid, because the capacity to adapt, both on human and wildlife side, is then challenged, because it is difficult to adapt very rapidly to rapid change. And so that, I think, the conditions for more conflict are likely to be exacerbated by changes in climate, long or short term. And so I think we do need to expect that. The links between the different panels and conventions explicitly on that are not yet there, because as we've seen, we've literally had it only in the UN Biodiversity Treaty for 5 months now. So yes, starting to make those links across could be one of the next major steps, but we're still in the baby steps on that level.
Yeah, Vidya, you want to add anything on climate change? Yeah, so I can give an example from the elephants that went to Kunming a couple of years ago that were very high profile. This movement was very likely caused by a severe drought that has some link with climate change. So these kind of things, we can expect more extreme conditions and less predictability on the systems. We have many questions on the chat box, but I would like to encourage people to ask the question directly to the panel. So then, Aaron Guo, do you want to make your question? And do we have other people in Zoom who want to open the camera, the microphone, and make your question directly? Not, I will read the question on Aaron. So Aaron is saying, Aaron from UCAS, University of Chinese Academy of Sciences, how does the relationship between federal government and local government in different areas, like in China, Sichuan, or Yunnan, or in Europe, Germany, and I would say Germany and the different subnational administrations, US, California, impact the relationship between humans and wildlife? For example, Central and Sichuan, Shanxi and giant pandas, Central and Yunnan, Asian elephants. And what do you think? So then I guess it's a matter of governance, about the decision making at different scales, between central governments and more local governments. Is that an issue? Is that you can comment on how it affects dealing with human-wildlife conflicts?
Are you asking all of us, or?
Yeah, Vidya, I think in India has an interesting experience dealing with central and state governments. So then any comment on that?
Oh, well, I think this is a issue when the laws are different, but in our country, the central and the state laws are the same, but the way it is administered on the ground, the state has more power. So, but I think because the laws are the same, it pretty much helps us compared to other places where the laws might differ between all different states, So that's all I have to say.
Well, I can chip in with an example of what we have tried. Well, China has a general, many provinces have policies on wildlife conflict compensation. But the compensation, in many cases, the scheme didn't work very well because verification of the case and estimation of the cost and all this tedious work cost a lot of labor, and the government usually didn't have enough human power to work on that, and often the case reported and took long time, and no response from no response at the end. So people gradually lost interest or didn't feel like they can rely on such a compensation regime. Well, what we have worked out is that to decentralize many of these steps, for example, verification and actually deciding on the cost can be done by villagers if they are organized into committees and they vote trusted members to do such a work. And this becomes much faster. And actually, this can be done with a small amount of contribution from, when we initiated this program, it was not government supported, but the donation from the society made the first, was the first endowment, and the community members would pay for certain amounts. So the money put together as a pool that's managed by village committee. They develop rules, they develop norms on how to process, how to evaluate, and how to compensate how much. For example, if the livestock is not managed, not herded, and then killed by carnivores, this was not compensated because you are responsible for managing your livestock. If a family didn't have a predation of livestock for a whole year because of a good management, they were rewarded by So these norms developed by communities not only very targeted, but also provided the preventional conditions that reduce livestock killing in the end. So I think a lot of these measures, although we have national policy or even laws to deal with the case, the issue, decentralized implementation is always nice to try.
So as Professor Rucha correctly likes to say, conservation is always local. But you need to have a legal framework and a policy framework, but at the end, you need the action locally. You cannot just do the conservation from very far away. Alex, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that was such an important point. And it's about this alignment of efforts across the scales. So there are actually studies that have shown, some nice ones from Spain, in fact, that have shown how local governments is more effective in dealing with some, for example, wolf conflicts there. And that boils back to the core of how you manage these conflicts, which is around if the communities that are affected have a decision-making power, the ownership of the whole process, then you are on the pathway to a sustainable solution that is locally driven. So that is absolutely key. And that is then reflected in these questions around governance. So the localized governance seems to be more effective. However, it has to then align with the national strategy and policy and so on. And so we actually do have 3 chapters related to this in the guidelines. One is on governance structures, one is on law, and one is on political ecology. So those could be worth checking out. At the same time, again, on the national intergovernmental level, we recently did a study with the World Bank on policies across the world. Right now, pre-Global Biodiversity Framework, only 30% of all NBSAPs even mention human-wildlife conflict, as much as just mention the words. And there's only 8 countries in the world that have entire national strategies on human-wildlife conflict at the national level. So I would predict that actually is going to increase now as well. And I think this matching up the local ownership with the entire country level is the key. As several others have said here, I think it's really important.
Thank you, Alex. Stephanie, if you want to make your question.
Okay. Can you hear me? Hello, everyone. My name is Yu Xiaoyu. I'm from XTBG. I have a question, especially for Professor Liu. As our expected, our conservation become more effective, and the population of the wildlife is also increased. As you said, there are more and more wild animals. So that indicates that more and more conflict will between the human and with animals. So before I saw an announcement from our Sichuan province government, it said it allowed local people to kill the wild boar, but they didn't give many details. So I'm very curious about what is the current development of the lethal control in our country and how it will develop in the future.
This is the question actually I do not have an answer to. Wildlife management through dealing with conflicts through management of wildlife population is a common practice in many countries. But for China, it's quite new because China had been banning wildlife killing for many years and start to but population in species such as wild boar has been indeed increasing in past few years. And also one problem is that we do not have large predators to regulate the wild boar population. In many ways, this is an human issue, human introduced the issue also, the population, the conflicts between wild boar and farmers, especially the crops. So in some provinces, the local government has decided to allow killing of wild boar as a management tool, but how to kill, how much to kill, in most cases, I don't think there are evidences, there are data to support the action. So I think in some of the provinces like Zhejiang is trying to develop an evidence-based policy and the action plan for managing wild boar population. It would be a very good case study to observe.
We have 3 questions about legal hunting, and they're a bit long, so I will not read the 3 of them. So basically, there is one from Veronica Nani that says, is culling or hunting legalization an effective way to build tolerance towards large carnivores? And she cites a paper by Chaprong and Trips that say that was not the case, at least in some case study. And also there are 2 questions asking about macaques and some other species in India. So then whether removing these animals, legally hunting them, culling them, or taking them for some other purposes, whether that's is something to consider or not, and why? Alex, what do you think about hunting?
Hunting in the context of human-wildlife conflict, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the questions about as a way to promote tolerance, for example, with large carnivores.
Okay, this is a tricky one because it goes so much into emotions, values, and politics also. And so I've seen in some, in fact, I've been a very close observer to some situations where governments are under such extreme pressure to cull an animal or a population in response to, frankly, voters' pressure. And so sometimes that pressure is so overwhelming that any scientific evidence will be ignored and it will happen. And so it tends to boil down to pressure, ultimately, whether or not lethal control happens. Again, this is the sort of thing where it's terribly important to look at the scientific, the ecological evidence very, very closely and look at what would happen if we're talking about cull, as in many of the same species. When it's down to taking out an individual animal, which is often, there's a huge pressure for that quite often in very high profile incidences, then again, it comes down to how the certainty of, is that the right animal? And is that going to solve the problem? And so, again, I'm sorry to keep mentioning the guidelines, but we do have, if you have a look in there, chapter 26, it has been written by my colleagues, Sogi Roy and others, and it's specifically about that question of pros and cons of lethal control and what to consider. So worth checking out.
May I chip in?
Yes,
on large predators, that it's very common that people, especially if human lives involved in, people have very strong feelings, emotional feelings toward this specific animal, and the government's reaction is often to remove this animal. Of course, like Alexandra said, if it's the right animal and there's any strong evidence, often hard to immediately provide that evidence. So it's more important to develop preventional measures to prevent that from happening again. And brown bear, as an example, on the Tibetan Plateau has this situation, and local communities and local NGOs for recent years have been developing bear-proofing houses and to reinforce doors and windows to prevent bears from breaking in. That has been proving very effective. So there are always other measures to comfort people and also actually prevent the severe incidences from happening again.
We have two final questions. I think we will keep it here. One is from William Patton from Bill, and I was from Nafal. So then, Bill, do you want to go first with your question? You can just turn on the camera and the microphone.
All right, I've turned them on. You can hear me?
We can hear you. We can see you.
Well, thank you. My question, this is very interesting, by the way. I'm not, operating in this field, but I'm a former UN official who often dealt with community communication and environmental issues across a range of different program types, from land mines to agriculture to run-of-river electricity. And in each of the contexts, beginning in Africa and later in Asia, the challenge was often really just our skill set in communicating with communities. So in fact, there was lots of potential. Run-of-river electricity, it's a no-brainer. It was almost a gimme, and you get 100 houses electrified. But if you didn't handle the communication well, the opportunity might not really become a reality. So I want to ask you how important you're finding it and how much of a challenge you're finding it. And I see that it's not just Professor Liu I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce Vidya's last name, Doctor, but also Dr. Zimmermann, because she has been working in a number of developing countries as well. How much of a challenge is it in India or China or other countries just simply to work with the communities? I'll give you an example. In Botswana, you needed to spend a half day at the chief's kotla every second or third Saturday for months if you want to get anywhere. So I just want to know how well that applies in your reality. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah. Anyone, Vidya, you want to start?
Thanks, William. That's just such a lovely question. And it is not just communities, it is also the administration and other stakeholders. In India, it's the forest department. And I think it's because we are largely biologists who don't have skills much in dealing with humans, and we are thrown out there, trying to address conflict. But if you ask me, I think it's just an amazing experience having that tea and hanging out with the village chiefs and just engaging with the community, let it be the local people or the forest departments or even the media. We found engaging with the media is such a powerful tool for changing narratives. So the solutions lie in people, and therefore we have to take the effort to engage with people, which I don't think is hard once you start the engagement, which is not about us telling you what to do, but it is about us helping you and working with you to bring about change. So thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I agree with Vidya that immediate, fast, quick response to the loss is important, because one of the complaints is actually these people, communities have a real loss, but no one cares. So someone cares is the first important thing to do. Then working together on the solution, even if the solution is not completely satisfying, but certain levels of satisfaction as a starting point would work. So instead of talking a lot, actions taken is more effective in communication, I think.
Thank you.
Alex, you want to add anything?
Just to echo both very excellent points, and Vidya's point also that most people working in conservation come into it originally, and the whole field has evolved from natural sciences. And here we are saying, well, this is all about people. Oh no, what do we do? And so I think really the next decade, we need to build up skills in the whole sector, hugely on the social sides, things like human behavior change. I saw a comment in the chat also on the importance of that, understanding what it makes individuals and communities break bad habits like feeding animals where it isn't helpful for anybody to do that, and that kind of thing. So social sciences are just absolutely essential for these kinds of issues. We need more upskilling in that as a whole community, as a sector. And I would go beyond that even and say what we need to start doing is work on conflict mediation and negotiation skills as well, and bring up that skill set in this sector at scale as well. That is my personal, very strong interest, something I'm working on at the moment. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you for your answers. I'd like to add a comment in 10 seconds, and that is that in several contexts, we found the skill set that we needed in the adult education department. And so what we had to do was send the run-of-river person or the landmine person together with a team of communicators, but the communicators took the lead. So thank you.
Just want to add one sentence to what Alexandra just mentioned. Understanding the causes and the needs of the community is absolutely important. One example is that understanding the livestock, the issues of livestock, for example, the loss of livestock in many countries, the number one cause is disease. So the carnivore predation is not the highest on top. So providing services, medical services to livestock as a compensation proved to work in many communities as well. So deep understanding to the local situation, the needs of communities would to provide a holistic solution would be a possibility too.
Thank you very much. So I think we will keep it here. We had a couple of other questions, so then sorry we will not be able to take them to not go over time too much. And it was nice to see that one of the questions was by a high school student from Beijing. And we have a few more comments now in the group, so we'll try to check the comments and respond, but we'll keep it here. So then a few kind of take-home messages. Human-wildlife conflicts are about people, so that was something that the three panelists mentioned multiple times. Human-wildlife conflicts often involve two groups of people disagreeing on something about over wildlife-related issues. We saw how human-wildlife conflicts and coexistence are now included in the highest level policy document for conservation, which is the GBA for the next decade. And that will have cascading consequences for conservation. I think that will include probably more resources, more policy interest, and probably more opportunities to increase the skill set, as was now built by Bill and by the panelists. And if we are successful, we will see more wildlife and more potential for conflict, but hopefully we will be effective at managing these interactions in a way that we can have more coexistence moving into the future. So I would like to thank very much the three panelists. It has been a very interesting panel. Address the audience to the Human-Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence Specialist Group website and look for the guidelines. There's also a very, very useful library with a lot of documents there. Basically, everything that is being published about human-wildlife conflict, I think with the proper licensing, it can be found there. So you can go there and download documents. And yeah, I'm doing a virtual applause to the panelists because it has been a great pleasure. So thank you very much, the three of you, and looking forward to see you in the future. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ahimsa.
Thanks all. Thanks, Ahimsa, for organizing.
Okay, so then just final reminder, next month, on the first Tuesday of July, we have another webinar. And we're also looking for manuscripts for integrative conservation and for a special issue on human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. So then please, if you have something to submit, just go to the website and submit. Thank you very much and see you next month. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.